The evidence-based approach works well when you have the time to collect and study evidence to make decisions. In some cases, we do not have this luxury. First, there is a cultural and geographical bias to scientific evidence. This is mainly a Western phenomena. For example, in the United States, the scientific method is prized above all other sources of knowledge. In other cultures, scientific evidence is not as valuable as personal experience. When working with other cultures, it is important to keep this in mind. You may try to use a different approach to collecting evidence than you would with another culture. Evidence may take too long to collect. In some circumstances, something must be done immediately. You can't wait for evidence. For example, if thousands of people are dying from infections in Indonesia every week, does it make sense to do an in-depth analysis of the history of infections in Asia? Or should you administer antibiotics? Your goal should be to save lives, right? So there are times when evidence is not the most important thing to worry about. In the same vein, many communities lack the resources to find evidence or do the best program. You may need to do what you can instead of what is actually needed. When dealing with communities, it is important to keep community values in mind. Find out what are acceptable approaches and treatments in the community. You may find that the best approach to deal with an issue is not the one the community will accept. So, now that we've looked at the limitations of the evidence-based approach, do you think it is still a viable option for your organization? While it is true that an evidence-based approach has its benefits, using only this approach to make decisions is not always the best way to proceed. The most effective public health initiatives use scientific evidence, but they also take into account community needs and assets, as well as the resources available. This balanced approach will keep the community involved in the process, which is essential for success. Also, it's important to keep an eye on resource use. At times, you'll be forced to do a lot with very little. By keeping track of how resources are being utilized, there won't be any surprises. It is also important to use scientific evidence to back up your claims, because without it, you will have little credibility. Without credibility, you most likely will have no funding, and your projects will cease to exist. By utilizing a balanced approach, you will be aware of problems before they spiral out of control. For example, if you find that your limited resources are becoming more limited because of budget cuts, you can adjust your goals instead of scrapping the project altogether.